Ibrahim Traoré stepped quietly into the luxurious Aurora restaurant, his outfit a striking contrast to the opulence surrounding him. He wore a simple yet well-tailored suit, his demeanor calm, collected, and powerful. The gilded chandeliers above cast a soft glow on the polished tables, each one surrounded by the elite of the city, all of them clad in designer attire. The hum of high-end conversations filled the room, a place where status was as important as the food being served. But Ibrahim Traoré was different. He didn't care for status, not in the traditional sense. He had worked his way to power through his own merit, resilience, and understanding of people, not the labels they wore. He had been invited to this exclusive restaurant as part of a gathering of high-profile figures, but his entry was nothing like the grand entrances of the other moguls. There were no flashy displays of wealth, no entourage trailing behind him, just him alone, walking confidently through the doors as if he belonged, because, in his mind, he did. Ibrahim had worked hard to get to where he was, but he never carried that weight like a burden. He was not interested in proving himself to others, especially not to those who thought their wealth gave them worth. As Ibrahim made his way through the dining room, a senior waiter named Marcus took notice of him immediately. Marcus, a recent promotion to shift manager, had made it his mission to act as the gatekeeper to this world of wealth and exclusivity. He had spent years cultivating an air of superiority, judging everyone who didn't meet his high standards of appearance. The minute he laid eyes on Ibrahim, Marcus's sense of self-importance flared. Ibrahim's simple, unpretentious attire was a stark contrast to the wealthy patrons around him, and Marcus was quick to assume that he didn't belong. "Look at this," Marcus muttered to one of his fellow staff members, Daniel, a young, nervous waiter. "Another one of these people thinking they can just walk in here." His voice dripped with disdain as he looked Ibrahim up and down, clearly judging him. "You can't just waltz in here dressed like that," Marcus continued. "You need more than money to be here. You need class." Daniel, unsure of how to respond, nervously glanced at Ibrahim but said nothing. "Watch how I handle this," Marcus said with a smug grin as he straightened his jacket and walked toward Ibrahim. Ibrahim, unaware of Marcus's assessment, calmly scanned the menu at the front desk. His presence was unwavering, but there was no arrogance in him, just a quiet confidence that many found disarming. Marcus reached him, crossing his arms in front of Ibrahim, his smile wide but insincere. "Good evening, sir," Marcus began, his voice syrupy sweet but laced with a condescending tone. "Are you lost?" Ibrahim looked up, his eyes meeting Marcus's with an unreadable expression. He didn't flinch, didn't break his composure. "No, I'm here for dinner," he responded calmly. Marcus raised an eyebrow, his irritation bubbling just below the surface. "Dinner? Well, this is Aurora, an exclusive establishment. We cater to a very specific clientele. Are you sure this is where you want to be?" His voice practically oozed arrogance. Ibrahim, still unflustered, responded, "Pretty sure, unless you're suggesting I'm not welcome." The directness of Ibrahim's question made Marcus pause for a second, but he quickly regained his composure. "Not at all," he said with a tight smile, his voice now dripping with condescension. But let's be honest, this isn't the kind of place where people in your situation typically dine. We have standards here." Ibrahim tilted his head slightly, his calm gaze sharpening as he regarded Marcus. "Standards?" he repeated, his voice low and steady. "And those standards are based on what exactly? The price tag on my jacket?" Marcus's facade of politeness faltered, but he quickly pushed forward, trying to reassert his dominance. "It's about presentation, poise, elegance, something you clearly don't understand." His voice rose slightly as he said the last part, just loud enough for a few nearby patrons to hear. Ibrahim's expression didn't change. His gaze remained fixed on Marcus, the weight of his words already hanging in the air. "Class," Ibrahim said, his voice now quieter but still carrying weight. "Interesting word. I always thought class was about how you treat people, not how much you spend on your shoes, but maybe I've got it wrong." The words hit Marcus hard, causing him to falter for a moment. The people around them started to take notice of the exchange, some stealing glances while others whispered among themselves. Ibrahim's response had been cool and calculated, not aggressive, but potent nonetheless. Marcus, growing more frustrated, tried to regain control of the situation. "I'm sure you think you're clever, but this is Aurora, not some cheap diner. You're out of your league here." His voice was sharp now, but the cracks in his bravado were beginning to show. Ibrahim simply smiled, the hint of steel in his eyes not lost on anyone who was watching. "I'm comfortable with what I'm wearing," he said, his voice calm but unwavering. "And I'm pretty sure your dress code doesn't trump basic hospitality. So, about that table?" Marcus's face flushed with anger, but he couldn't challenge Ibrahim's calm demeanor. His smirk began to fade as he realized the situation was slipping out of his hands. Fine, he spat, his voice dripping with venom. If you insist on embarrassing yourself, then go ahead and sit down. Enjoy your dinner. He motioned to the least desirable table in the restaurant, tucked away in a dim corner, far from the elegant main dining area. Ibrahim remained composed, nodding his thanks as he made his way to the table Marcus had chosen for him. But this was not just about a meal. Ibrahim wasn't here for the food or the ambiance. He had made his point. The evening was just beginning, and Marcus hadn't realized yet that the tables were about to turn in more ways than one. As Ibrahim sat down at the dimly lit corner table, his posture remained relaxed. He had already shown Marcus that he wasn't the type to be intimidated by looks or status, and now he settled into the uncomfortable chair with ease. The noise of the restaurant continued as before, the clinking of glasses and the low hum of conversations filling the air. But there was a shift in the atmosphere. The guests, some of them more accustomed to the type of treatment Marcus had been doling out, watched the scene unfold with curiosity. Marcus, satisfied with the seemingly humiliating placement of Ibrahim, stood at the front of the restaurant with a sense of victory. He wasn't just a waiter. He had elevated himself in his own eyes to the protector of Aurora's reputation. It was his power, his authority, and the mere thought of someone like Ibrahim Traoré stepping into his domain was unacceptable. He glanced over to the patrons, eager to see their reaction to the man in the cheap clothes at the lowly table. But to his surprise, the group that had earlier whispered and smirked now turned their attention to Ibrahim. Elena, a wealthy woman draped in a shimmering sapphire gown, leaned over to Victor, her husband. "This is ridiculous," she whispered. "That waiter has no business treating him like that." Victor, who had initially found the entire exchange amusing, now shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Maybe he's not so out of place," he murmured, his gaze fixed on Ibrahim, who sat unfazed in his quiet dignity. Charles, the silver-haired businessman sitting at another table nearby, observed the scene with growing interest. Unlike the others, he wasn't reacting to the theatrics. His gaze was sharp, his mind calculating. He saw Ibrahim not as the interloper that Marcus had painted him to be, but as someone with an aura that told a different story, one of power and respect. His eyes met Elena's, and for a brief moment, there was a silent understanding. Meanwhile, Marcus was oblivious to the shift around him. He was focused on what he thought was his win. He walked by Ibrahim's table, glancing down at him with a barely concealed smirk. "Enjoy your seat," he muttered, making sure his words were loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. "I'm sure the ambiance here will really match your style." Ibrahim, still unshaken, looked up at Marcus. His eyes were calm, but there was a quiet intensity there that was impossible to ignore. He didn't respond immediately, simply turning his attention back to the menu in front of him, as though Marcus wasn't even there. But the air was thick now, charged with the energy of something waiting to happen. Then, as Marcus passed by the table again, he made his move. With a flourish, he spilled a glass of water. An accident, he claimed, but one that was far too perfect. It soaked Ibrahim's lap, the liquid splashing onto the pristine white tablecloth. The entire restaurant turned to witness the moment, their eyes wide with expectation. "Oh, my apologies," Marcus said loudly, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Accidents happen when we're so busy catering to the real guests, don't they?" He gave a small mocking bow, his satisfaction evident in the malicious gleam in his eyes. Ibrahim slowly looked down at his soaked clothes, not with frustration, but with quiet acknowledgement. He picked up a napkin, dabbing it at his lap, not flustered, not angry, just calm. He turned to Marcus, his voice measured but sharp. "Accidents do happen," Ibrahim said quietly, "but I'm beginning to think this one wasn't so accidental." Marcus froze for a moment. There was something in Ibrahim's voice, something that rattled him more than he was willing to admit. He recovered quickly, narrowing his eyes and smirking again. "If you can't handle it here," Marcus said with exaggerated politeness, "maybe you should just leave. This place isn't for people like you." Ibrahim, still composed, looked up at Marcus. "You know, Marcus," he said, his voice calm but carrying an edge, "I don't need to justify myself to you. But I do need to point out something. It's not the clothes that matter here. It's the way you treat people. And you're failing at that." The words hung in the air, and for the first time, Marcus faltered. Ibrahim's gaze didn't waver, his calmness a stark contrast to Marcus's growing frustration. Around them, The whisper started again. More and more patrons were noticing the confrontation. They were starting to see what was happening, and the tone of the room shifted. Ibrahim leaned back slightly in his chair, surveying the space with quiet interest. He knew Marcus wasn't done with him yet, but the power dynamic had already started to shift. Marcus, who had prided himself on his ability to make people feel small, was now facing a man who refused to be made to feel anything less than equal. From the corner of the room, Richard, the restaurant manager, had been watching the exchange from a distance. He had heard the whispers from other patrons and could sense the tension rising. Richard, a man in his mid-50s, had been in the restaurant business long enough to know when something was wrong. He had seen the way Marcus had treated Ibrahim, and he had seen the way the entire dining room had started to react. Richard walked swiftly toward Ibrahim's table, his steps deliberate, his expression calm but firm. He knew the time had come to address the situation before it escalated further. As Richard approached Ibrahim's table, the atmosphere in the room seemed to grow stiller, as though everyone was waiting for something big to happen. Marcus, still unaware of just how deeply he had overstepped, was now watching from the side, his hands clenched tightly around the serving tray. He had assumed the situation was in his control, but now, seeing Richard approaching with purpose, his confidence wavered. Richard, the seasoned manager with decades of experience, stopped just short of Ibrahim's table. His eyes, sharp and observant, studied the scene before him. He glanced briefly at Marcus, who was standing by, and then looked back at Ibrahim. Without a word, he nodded respectfully toward Ibrahim, signaling a quiet acknowledgement of the tension in the room. "Good evening, Mr. Traore," Richard said, his voice measured but not without a hint of urgency. "I apologize for the inconvenience. Please allow me to make this right. The table you've been assigned is unacceptable, and we have a much better arrangement available." Ibrahim's eyes met Richard's, and a small, knowing smile tugged at the corner of his lips. He knew exactly what was happening. This wasn't about a spilled drink or a seat in the corner. It was about the message Marcus had sent. He wasn't just some celebrity, and he wasn't here to cause trouble. But what he had received in return was disrespect masked as arrogance. "Thank you, Richard," Ibrahim said, his voice calm. "But I think the real issue here isn't the table. It's the way people treat others based on their assumptions." Richard didn't respond immediately. He understood. The deeper issue wasn't just about the table. It was about the behavior that Marcus had exhibited toward Ibrahim and his unspoken judgments. The way Marcus had decided who belonged and who didn't, purely based on appearances. Richard had seen this behavior before, but it had never played out quite so publicly, nor so brazenly. Meanwhile, Marcus stood frozen, his face turning a shade of red that seemed to darken by the second. He could feel the eyes of the entire restaurant on him now. The atmosphere had shifted dramatically from one of subtle mockery to one of tension and expectation. The elderly couple at the next table had noticed the exchange, their earlier amusement gone. Elena, the woman in the sapphire gown, whispered something to Victor, who had been leaning back smugly in his chair. She was shaking her head now, her earlier reservations about Ibrahim's seating suddenly fading away as she came to understand what had really been happening. "I told you," Elena whispered. "He's been nothing but polite. That waiter has no business treating him like that." Victor looked uncomfortable now. His earlier smirk had faded. "You're right," he said quietly. "I don't think Marcus knows what he's messing with." Charles, the businessman sitting at the far end of the room, had observed the entire exchange. He had remained silent for most of the evening, but now, as he watched Marcus's discomfort grow, he couldn't help but smile inwardly. He had always believed that some lessons were best taught in public. Back at Ibrahim's table, Richard stood patiently, giving Marcus the chance to regroup. But Marcus didn't seem to know what to do next. The shift in the atmosphere was unmistakable, and now the focus was not on Ibrahim's appearance, but on the blatant disrespect he had been subjected to. Marcus finally cleared his throat, his voice low and defensive. "Mr. Traoré," he began, forcing a smile he didn't feel. "I'm terribly sorry for the misunderstanding. If you'd like, we can offer you a better table." Ibrahim didn't respond right away. He simply held Marcus's gaze for a moment, letting the silence hang between them. "I've been offered a better table already, Marcus," Ibrahim replied quietly, his words deliberate. "But I don't think that's what I need." Marcus's smile wavered. He had expected Ibrahim to play along, to be flustered by the situation, to leave in embarrassment. But instead, Ibrahim's calm, unshaken demeanor was an affront that Marcus wasn't prepared for. Richard stepped in, his patience clearly wearing thin. Marcus, we'll discuss this in the back, he said, his tone now carrying a firm edge. For now, please see to Mr. Traore's needs. I'll take care of everything else. Marcus shot a look at Richard, then at Ibrahim. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, Richard was already walking away, his back straight, his expression one of quiet authority. The tension in the restaurant was now palpable. Patrons who had been silently observing, unsure of how to react, now exchanged glances. Elena leaned in toward Victor once more, her voice quieter now, but resolute. He deserves to be treated like everyone else, and Marcus is going to learn that the hard way. Victor nodded, his earlier reluctance now replaced by an odd sense of respect for Ibrahim. Let's see if Marcus can get it right. As Marcus stood there, barely able to meet Ibrahim's gaze, he could feel the weight of the entire restaurant's eyes on him. The subtle whispers of disapproval, the occasional click of a phone as someone snapped a picture. It was all too much. He could feel his once imposing presence slipping away, like sand through his fingers. His mind raced, but his body remained still, as if frozen by his own actions. Meanwhile, Ibrahim, sitting calmly at his table, took no pleasure in Marcus's discomfort. He wasn't there to embarrass anyone. He had simply wanted a quiet dinner. But sometimes the universe had a way of forcing us into uncomfortable situations, offering a chance to teach us something we hadn't yet learned. Richard, sensing that the tension had reached its peak, made his way toward Ibrahim's table. His stride was purposeful, but not hurried. As he arrived at the table, he gave Ibrahim a respectful nod, offering a small smile of reassurance. "Mr. Traoré," Richard said softly, his voice calm but filled with genuine apology. "Once again, I apologize for this disturbance. This is not how we run things here. Please allow me to make things right. Your dinner will be on the house, and I will personally ensure that the rest of your evening is seamless." Ibrahim smiled, appreciative of Richard's efforts, but his gaze never wavered from the scene unfolding before him. His calmness was a reflection of a deep understanding. Life had taught him to rise above petty conflicts and to stand firm when others attempted to belittle him. He didn't need to prove anything. It was clear that Marcus still hadn't grasped this fundamental truth. "I appreciate the gesture, Richard," Ibrahim replied, his voice steady. "But I think the real lesson here isn't about the meal. It's about how we treat each other. And it's about respect." Marcus, still standing awkwardly by the table, heard those words like a slap. Ibrahim wasn't trying to argue, wasn't trying to start a fight. He was simply speaking the truth. But Marcus wasn't ready to hear it. Not yet. His pride still clung to the belief that he had been in control, that his actions were justified. He wasn't willing to admit how deeply he had misjudged Ibrahim, how wrong he had been to treat him with such disdain. As Richard left to attend to the rest of the room, the rest of the patrons resumed their conversations, though the tension remained. Victor and Elena exchanged one last glance, both of them silently acknowledging the shift in the room. The wealthy, the powerful, and the elite, they had all been witness to this small moment of personal growth for Marcus. And though they would likely move on quickly, forgetting the specifics of the night, they would never forget the feeling it left behind. Marcus, however, couldn't escape the weight of his actions. He had tried to humiliate Ibrahim, to put him in his place based on his appearance. But now, as he stood there, powerless, his arrogance stripped away, he couldn't help but feel the sting of his own foolishness. He had assumed that Ibrahim was just another rich man, another celebrity who didn't belong in the exclusive world of Aurora. But Ibrahim had shown him that true worth wasn't in the clothes you wore, the car you drove, or the money you had. It was in how you treated others. It was in your ability to respect and acknowledge the humanity in everyone, regardless of their appearance.